What's going on YouTube? In this video, I'll be showing you how to create a simple forgot password feature in your applications using React Native Expo as your front end, Node as your back end, and MongoDB as your database. By the end of this video, you should be set up to create a full feature that sends the user a verification code to reset their password, and by the end of it, they will have a reset password for your application. Now, this is an absolutely essential thing you need in most applications because you do not want your users being locked out to an application because that can ruin the revenue you generate from an application and ruin the star ratings and that sort of thing. So it's just a really bad user experience if you don't get this right. So I'll be showing you a really simple way to do it in this video. Enough being said, let's jump into it. Okay, so jumping into it with the code and the simulator here, I am using Expo to simulate this, Expo start. And so as you can see here, I'm running the code in real time, and we're gonna start from the very beginning of this forgot password process, which starts on this sign-in component or sign-in screen that I have in my application. Now you can ignore a majority of this code. We just wanna focus on this first button here, which is the forgot password. So you can imagine the user we have today is Dolly backend at gmail.com. And I already know the password for this user, but imagine I put in some fake password and some scenario where I actually forgot the password. I'm eventually going to click this forgot password button, and it's going to take me to a forgot password screen. So how this works is we simply have this forgot password button here, which is just a button component in React. You can ignore all the other HTML and all the styling. I would imagine you have different HTML and styling in your application. And so what happens is when you click this button, simply we go to the onPress, and onPress triggers the handle forgot pass function. Now, what does that handle forgot pass function do? Well, it's a really simple function in this first step, and it simply takes us to the forgot password page. So if you have been developing multi-page applications in React, you should be familiar with the navigator, and this simply allows us to navigate to that page, as simple as that, and we clear the states. This is just clearing the fields of this component. So if we go back, it will be a clean slate. That's literally all we're doing for this first step here. So we have this button and it navigates us to another screen, and we will delve into that screen in the next step. So I'm just gonna go ahead and click this and go to that screen. Okay, so the next step in the process we have is the forgot password screen, as I mentioned. So this component is the first component we use to interact with the Node backend, which I'll talk about in detail here in a second. So in this screen, what it's pretty much taking is a really simple field, email, and we're setting the state of that user email as they type in. And the main magic here is in the reset password button. So you can ignore everything else essentially. We're just taking that email and we're processing it with the reset password button. So this is the button here. And what that button is simply doing, it's simply triggering a function called handle reset password. Now let's go up to that function and see what it does. So this function, once again, it's an asynchronous function. It takes the email from that field. So we just set the email and the payload of data, and we're going to post it to our back end. So our back end is currently hosted on localhost 3001, but for your application, it might be something different. And we're just doing an Axios post to post this information to the back end. And the path we have is reset password, okay? But you can name that whatever you want. I would imagine maybe you have a different name for this. Maybe you are doing this in production. You can do this in production. So you would want to change that depending on your host and on your extension here. So once we get the response from that, if we get a successful response from the back end, we're going to set this forgot email for the whole application. So we're using something called use context to set forgot email. And the reason we're using something called use context, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about, there's many tutorials online about use context. This sets the state of this variable in the whole application so other components or other screens can access this variable. And the reason we want to do this is so the next screen can access this email and process some information based on this email. So that's why I'm using use context here, and I'm setting the forgot email using the context so the next component can simply get it from the global context in my application and do some logic with that. We'll talk about more of that in the next component, which is the final screen. We'll get to that in a second. And finally, we navigate to the next screen if we do successfully. Else, we say there is an issue resetting your password, please try again. And we typically want to be generic in such messages because we don't want to signal to this person that the user does exist in the application, because that can lead to security issues. So on many websites online, if you try to click the forgot password button, it'll say something like, if an email does exist, we have sent you an email. So they try to be vague so that the person maybe someone's trying to hack into your account. They don't want someone to know that your account actually exists on that website. So try to be vague with that message. It's just better for security purposes. Now, finally, let's delve into this reset password in the backend. So I have this backend component. Let's go to my app.js. And I'm not going to go into any detail about developing a node backend, because I would imagine if you're watching this video, you have some concept of doing such a thing. Because we are using a node backend and we are using a MongoDB database, that's beyond the scope of this video to tie that all together. So let's go to that path. So it's just forgot password. It's reset password. It's reset password. So we can see with this component here in our back end, this path, what we have is it parses the email from the request we sent it. The next thing it does is it creates an object from a schema object from the schemas I define. And this is just my sign-in table. So if you go here, and if you have been working with MongoDB, you should be familiar with this process. So I define my schema as this for sign-in, a very simple schema for the user in my database, which I'll show you in a second how that looks actually in MongoDB. And that's just simply a password, an email, a code, verified. And the two things we want to focus on are the reset token. So we're sending a reset token and we're setting that in the database. And finally, we're setting a reset token expiration, because we don't want this token to last forever or very long, because that can also lead to some security repercussions, and we do not want that. So the main two things we're doing with this back-end function is we're assigning that user with that email, if they exist, a reset token and a reset token expiration to use later on for verification. So let's go back to that one more time and finally walk through it. So we make sure that the user exists here. So we say if existing user, we await sign-in table.find1. So we check in the database with this schema if the user exists with that email. If not user, I'm just going to do some console logging or console error. And I'm also going to send the front end an error message to process that. Other than that, what we want to do is we want to generate a random token. So this token can be defined on yourself. Honestly, I haven't thought too much about what's the best way to generate a secure token for the user. I thought 5 would be a good length, not too overwhelming for the user. And also, I didn't really encrypt the token at all, so maybe there's some encryption you want to do around the token. But I just simply generate a token with a function I have. And I could show you that function real quick. It's nothing fancy. It's just a generator function that generates a 5-character long word that has, or string, that has letters and numbers. So that's literally all it does. So just some randomization there. You can do whatever you want in terms of generating the code and design the verification code as you like. So let's go back to that reset password. Finally, once we have that code, we assign it to the user in the database, and we assign the reset token expiration to the current date plus this number, which is 1 hour. And finally, we save that in the database. Finally, once we save it in the database, we want to send the email to that user so they know they can get the token. And we just send a response to the front end that this whole process is successful. And we send them a message as well to the front end. I don't believe I'm doing anything processing with this particular message, but you can do some stuff if you want a specific message from the back end that it has been processed. So that's pretty much the whole gist of it. And sending an email, I have a video of how to send an email right here in NodeMailer using Gmail. So I'll link that right here so you guys can watch that. I'm not going to go into detail about sending an email. Just know I use this function that sends an email to the user with a reset token. And you can watch that video if you are confused about sending email. It's generally pretty easy. So let's go ahead and type the user here, and I can show you how that looks in the email. So dollybackend@gmail.com. So let's go ahead and click reset password, and let's give it a sec. Okay, so after navigating to the next screen, we know that it sent the token properly and it set it in the database properly. So let's just go ahead and confirm that with the actual email and in the database before we start talking about this final component to actually reset the password. So let's go to Google Chrome here. So I already have my email, and let's just close that video editing stuff that I've been doing. So right here, we could see we have the dollybackend@gmail.com. We could see we have the reset token and the reset token expiration as expected and as sent, which is awesome. And then another thing we want to check is, does that match the email that was sent? So we were sent an email, and that email has that exact token. So everything is good. Now we're on the last step where we simply have to put this reset token in and put a new password. And finally, we should be good to go in terms of signing in to our account if we put the reset token in properly within the allotted time frame. So let's go back and talk that final component, because that is the last key to getting our new password for our user. So let's go ahead and close the previous forgot password screen, and let's talk about the reset password confirmation screen, okay? So in this screen, what's simply happening is, we're just typing in some form information for the verification code. So the verification code we have is O26GM. So let's just type that in. So O26GM, okay? So we have O26GM, and let's type in a new password. Let's make it a strong password. I think I have some strong password check here. Actually, I don't in this component, but I should add that. So let's just add a password that's strong. So I'll just say at B, capital B, small b, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's just do that here. So at capital B, small b, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So before we submit that, we have this submit button. I want to talk about it, obviously, because this is the final button to tie everything together. And once again, it is a button component, so don't be surprised. And we also have this other styling, which once again, you can ignore. And what's going on is once we press this button, it's going to call the handle submit function. And another interesting thing I have in this component is we can actually resend the code. And sometimes, maybe there's some issue with the user's email or something happened with the backend processing. So there's a button to resend the code, and that simply calls the same backend component that we had before. So that's simply all that's happening with that resend code button. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. But let's talk about the submit function that's being triggered. So that's the handle submit. So let's go up to that and finalize with discussing this. So it's an asynchronous function, and we want to make sure that the new password matches the confirmed password. So these two fields have to match before we can even send anything to the backend. And we're wrapping everything in a try and catch. Maybe I should have wrapped this in the try as well, but this isn't the most robust code. You can definitely make it better in terms of cleaner code, but I'm just showing you this in terms of the concept. So hopefully by the end of this, you really understand the concept of what's going on here to have this whole process. So what we're sending to the back end is simply the email, the verification code, and the password. So how does it get this email? So remember we talked about that use context. So it's getting the context from the previous component that it sets, and it's just putting it in the payload to send to the back end. The verification code is simply got from this field right here, and the password is simply from this new password field as well. Now, once again, we're sending the payload to the back end with a different path, reset password confirm, and once we get a success, we set the success message as reset successful. We set the error as null, and we simply navigate to the home component of our application, and we set the forgot email in the context as null. So the final thing we want to talk about is this reset password confirm. So what's going on with this reset password confirm? So let's go to the back end and talk about that more. So reset password confirm is right here. So once again, we have the schema object, and we're just parsing the email, the verification code, and the password from the payload from the front end. And we're searching the database for a user with that email. And actually, I started doing the verification in the back end. So I just checked the password strength. You don't have to know too much about this, but I have this simple logic where I check the strength of the password. So it has to have, I believe, a capital letter, lowercase letter, a certain length, and a special character. But you don't really need this. So I'm just checking if the password is strong here. Okay. And if it's not strong, I'm going to tell the front end that it's not a strong password. And next thing I'm doing is I'm checking if the verification code matches the verification code in the database. That's really important. You want to make sure the verification codes are one-to-one. And finally, the other thing I'm doing there with that if statement logic is I'm comparing the reset token expiration date to a new date. And I have to make sure that the reset token expiration is less than that date, or else the token has expired. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to hash the password in the database as I save it. And I want to set that user password as the hash password. I want to set the token as null because we exhausted the token, we used it. And I want to set the token expiration as also null. And finally, I want to save these three things in the database. So I want to save the password, and I want to pretty much nullify the token information, and I want to send the response to the front end. So if we did everything correctly here with this password at @bb12345, @bb12345, We are within the hour time frame. We made sure the verification code matched. We should be able to go to the home screen of this application and start doing stuff. So let's go ahead and click submit here and make sure we did everything correctly. So let's click submit. Okay, so it did take us to the home screen. So that looks like everything is correct. Let's go to the database, make sure everything was reset properly, and we did the whole process correct. So let's go back to Google Chrome here. So we didn't get a verification email that we reset the password. That's another feature you can add, is send the user that they reset their password to make sure they wanted to do that for security purposes, but I haven't done that yet. But in MongoDB, we can confirm that the new password is going to change. So right now it's this password. If I refresh the screen, we should see something else. It is encrypted, so we can't necessarily see it in MongoDB. So let's go ahead and refresh it. So, okay, cool. We can see that the password changed for Dolly backend. Now let's go make sure that we can actually sign in with that same password that we wrote, just to confirm that the whole feature works. So let's go ahead and sign out of the application. And let's write Dolly backend at gmail.com. And let's type in the password. I have a little show password feature to prove to you that is the password. So at capital B, small b, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if we did everything correct, we should be able to log in there. So we did everything correct. So that is the whole feature from end to end. Just a couple back end paths there and a couple of components in the front end and some logic. And we were able to string together a pretty nice reset password verification feature that allows the user to get back into the application to start using your application. And this is a really essential feature you pretty much need in every application to ease the user experience and prevent frustration and prevent bad reviews for your app. So if you enjoyed this video and if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. And if you haven't, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, because there's a lot more content where I do full stack content like this. And if you're also interested in other Python content and microcontroller content, I also have that on my channel. Let me know what you guys want to see in the comment section down below. Stay tuned and thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy.